Before we get started, just a few things here. We want to make sure we observe proper decorum, be quiet, no applause, no cheering. After we're all said and done, applaud, cheer, all you want to. We want to be able to listen to the candidates. Before we started, we took draw names, so the order of how they'll answer questions has been determined beforehand. Most of the questions that the candidates will be answering were submitted by the readers of North Dakota newspapers. Over 100 questions were submitted. The panelist here, Mike Jacobs, editor-publisher, retired from the Grand Forks Herald. Sarah Plum, editor of the, Minnewaca and Lakota newspapers. She'll be asking the questions. Let's see what else I have. Candidates will have 1 minute opening statements. I'll introduce them in a minute. Then they will have 1 minute to answer each question. We'll go through our questions. At the end, they'll have a chance to ask each other a question, and then they'll have a closing statement. I think that's pretty much all we have. I'll go ahead and introduce the candidates. Our first candidate is the Marty Riske, a businessman from Fargo, is the Libertarian Party candidate. You can applaud now. Our second candidate is Doug Burgum, an entrepreneur and businessman from Fargo, is the Republican candidate. I feel like I'm in the way. And our final candidate is Marvin Nelson, an agricultural consultant from Rolla, is the Democratic candidate. Too loud. And we will begin with opening statements. Marty Riske, by order of draw, will go first.
How's that? I'd like to start out by introducing you to my wonderful wife, Ann. She clapped the hardest when I was introduced. I don't know if you noticed. We are faced with a situation that I refer to as the perfect storm. There's a whole bunch of cloud fronts moving in on North Dakota that each represent their own terrific dangers. One is low commodity prices. Second is low oil prices. The retail sales are suffering as a result of that. And there's a couple of hidden storm fronts too. One of them is the zero interest rate policies of the Fed is causing a substantial portion of our public employee pension funds to suffer a decline in interest income. And so to get out front and say that we hope to get an 8% return on our pension funds is increasingly unlikely. In fact, the latest report from the Legacy Fund is that the annual rate of return was 2.65, which is considerably less than 8%. So I think we need to work toward forecasting much lower with a hoped-for surprise. And the reason that I am in favor of doing that is because when you forecast for something much lower, you have time to plan for that. When you are planning for higher levels of income, and
Please finish.
Okay, when you're planning for higher levels of income and there's a surprise on the downside, now you're being reactionary.
Thank you. Doug Burgum.
Good evening, I'm Doug Burgum. I grew up in Arthur, North Dakota, and I'm grateful to have had an opportunity to grow up in a town of 350 people, learn all the great lessons that you can learn, being close to the land, having some great friends, caring teachers, loving parents, some good coaches. And then when I was a freshman in high school, my dad passed away, and I got to learn a bunch of new lessons, which I saw my mom go back to work as a single mother raising 3 kids. After NDSU, I had a chance to go to graduate school and discovered the power of personal computers and personal software, and knew about all the people that were leaving North Dakota because there'd been no opportunity here for young people. And I said, this is something new back in North Dakota. So I moved back home, and I'd had a piece of ground that I had inherited from my dad. I took a mortgage out on that, so I literally bet the farm on that piece of ground, and that became the seed capital for a company called Great Plains, and we created 2,000 jobs in North Dakota, hiring kids from over 220 different towns across the state. So I've seen what North Dakota kids can do, and know that we can to reach our full potential. We can do more things like that in the future.
Marvin?
I'm Marvin Nelson. As I said, I'm an agricultural consultant from Rolla, North Dakota. I grew up in Rugby, and my wife Susan is also here tonight, and I thank her for coming. We face difficult times in North Dakota, not because they're so bad, but because there's such a change in such a short period of time. Our revenues are down $5 billion out of $12 billion. We do not have the money to do the things that we were doing, and yet people continue to come up with even more new things to do. We've had 24 years of wealthy Republican businessmen as governor, and it's left us with a capital of poor people in having very poor outlook on life. Our workers in our capital are disheartened. And the people of North Dakota too, even in the Republican Party, many of them do not feel that they are represented. And so we are seeing problems with waste, we are seeing problems with development, we are seeing problems in agriculture across this state because our government has become disconnected from our people. Thank you.
Our first question will be asked by Sarah and Mr. Doug.
Thank you. This question comes from a reader from Warwick. And the reader asks, the current farm economics are weighing heavily on producers. What are your thoughts about the combining of major agribusinesses leading to concentrated control of farm inputs as well as markets for products?
Well, we are facing some real ag challenges in North Dakota, but this is not a new thing for our state. It goes back to our earliest roots, where as a state we were highly dependent on commodity prices. And while we've become more productive, farmers in North Dakota are some of the most productive in the world, producing record crops across lots of different products. We're still in a position where when ag prices turn down, then farm income drops, and we're seeing that now in the communities. I've had a chance to travel across the state to every community over 1,000. People aren't buying farm machinery, people aren't buying new pickup trucks and there's almost virtually no farm income this year. And so we do need to think about how do we do value add, how do we add value to those products so that we're not so dependent just on the commodity prices which we can't control.
Okay. We see a general pattern. When oil and wheat went up, fertilizer went up. And when oil and wheat went down, fertilizer stayed up. We have a concentration in many of our suppliers that does not really create an open market competition for the inputs for our producers. And that creates a lot of problems. The other end is marketing. And right now we have a state mill and elevator that's being run with all the bonuses being paid on profits. And when the state mill and elevator is making high profits, that means they're paying less than they could pay to the producers. And the producers need that money right now. Throughout the history of North Dakota, the state mill has really been a regulatory agency on the grain trade and has resulted in great savings, great income differences for our producers. And we need to manage that elevator for our producers today.
Thank you. And now for you, Marty.
My experience has been that when there's been recessionary times, people who are very intelligent and industrious get laid off or lose their jobs, or income goes down, and that's when they decide that they're going to be an entrepreneur. And I would look for in the immediate near future in our economy to see a lot of new startups, and I would also look for large companies and suppliers that are unwieldy because of their size and being vulnerable and declining in the face of a recession.
Thank you.
Our second question will be for Marvin and Mike. This question.
This is another top-of-mind question, and it comes from a reader in Rolette County. The Dakota Access Pipeline is the subject here. Should the line be completed? Was the permitting process properly handled? Was it fair to all interested parties?
The process seems to be a mess from the start. I remember back in Rolla when we built our store, every day it was freezing up in the fall, and we didn't know if we could start construction the next day. Yet we didn't dare start construction until we had all the paperwork in our hands. Yet these multi-billion-dollar projects start construction before they have all the permits. The siting and such, it should not have been sited where it was. If the procedure was operating properly, it should not have taken any input from anybody. The experts that work in these things should not have put it in a source water protected area. And so there's been mistakes from the beginning. Now we have to pull back, we have to look at it, and we have to decide what we can do. And I don't know exactly where that's going to go, but we have to have an open mind.
Marty, I think the question goes to you.
You know, one thing that did happen here is that, first of all, a federal judge took a considerable length of time, some people thought too long a time, to fully determine, did his due diligence and determined that everything was done properly in order to get the pipeline built. So then what happened immediately after that is that President Obama, ignoring rule of law in the case of this federal judge, came back behind him and waved his hand and said, no, it's not a done deal. And so really what he did when he did that, I think, is he took the ball into the court, and now the ball is in his hands, because anything that we do that he can come behind and turn around and turn it into a negative is bad policy for us. So I see it as President Obama's job to get it done.
Doug, the question will go to you.
Well, I think this is, as we're seeing, this is a collision of principles at the highest level, because this is certainly an opportunity for us to honor what's great about being an American, which is the opportunity for free speech and the First Amendment rights for people to protest, speak their mind, and do that peacefully. We also have got at issue over several hundred years of native relationships, and the feeling that their promises with the federal government have been broken. We've got private property rights. We've got permitting process at the state and federal level. We've got law enforcement and the people that are serving to make sure that we're protecting people here. So as we see this collision coming together here right in North Dakota, not miles from where we stand tonight, I think there's an opportunity for us to open up a new dialogue, and maybe that dialogue can take us to a future that gets us to a better place regarding all these issues.
Mini returning, water is life. 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 We will never allow this pipeline through, not now and not ever. This is something that each one of you need to understand. This is 1851 treaty land. It is not legal. It is no different than if we said no to do since you guys broke that treaty. Or no to NAFTA. We want a strong North Dakota. We want a strong. You need to start changing to just transitions for our energy workers. You need to stop fracking because it's poisoning our water. Water is life. Water is life. Water is life.
Okay, excuse me.
Water is life. 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 Water is life.
Excuse me.
Water is life.
Excuse me, you guys agreed to our rules, and we are not trying to deny your free speech. Believe me, free speech. Okay, if you can abide by our rules, you can stay. If you can't, you're going to have to leave. We want you to hear, we want you to stay, but we want you to abide by our rules. Okay?
Water is life! Water is life!
Okay, again, when we came in, we asked everybody to abide by our rules. This is a forum for the candidates. So, if you can abide by those rules and be quiet, save your comments and your applause and your cheers so that after you can stay. Otherwise, there are people here who will help you leave. So we don't want that to do. We want everybody to stay so we can continue. All right? Thank you.
Okay, Marty, this...
What water will your grandchildren drink? Think about that. U.S. government has broken every tree that they say was in their control. Every single one.
There's things more important than money.
Step up. Honor the indigenous people of this state, of this country, of this land. Step up. Do the right thing.
And you get a vote. You do your right job, and then you get a vote.
Yep, okay. This next question goes to Marty.
Sarah will ask this question.
Oh, sorry. Let's pretend you're a teacher who is grading the state government's handling of the recent oil boom. What letter grade would you give and why?
I'm sorry, I
Do you want me to repeat the question, Marty?
Well,
Water is life. Don't get that, but that is on your head.
Okay, let's try this again, Marty. Let's pretend you're a teacher who's grading the state government's handling of the recent oil boom. What letter grade would you give and why?
well, that's a good question. You know, it's such a complicated thing. I was out in western North Dakota in the early 80s, back when they were dipping straws into the ground without fracking. They were a lot simpler back then. It required a lot fewer men to sink a hole. And so in Williston, for example, the city really didn't expand that much. It really didn't change all that much. People got richer, but the city itself didn't strain city resources quite so badly. With fracking, you had water hauling, you had chemicals, sand. It was just involved so many more people that it became a crush. And in a crush situation, I'd have to give them an A. I think that it was very, very strenuous situation. I can't even imagine trying to accommodate all of the things that needed to be done as quickly as they needed to be done. And the other thing about it too is that in the case where we fell apart back in the 80s, it went down really fast. This time it's been slower, but it's still going down.
Well, I think as Marty was saying, I mean, this is unprecedented in terms of the amount of economic activity, often hitting communities that were very small. My running mate, Brent Sanford, the mayor of Watford City, I think is a great example of someone who was managing this. When Brent moved back to North Dakota in 2004, there was, I think, 6 kids born that year, including his daughter that year. Now there's over 100 kids in her class at Watford City, and we're seeing cities like Watford, continue to grow their enrollment. Williston had another 400 people, added to their schools this year. So this, in terms of managing, we had to, housing, affordable housing for teachers. How do we handle daycare? How do we manage basic infrastructure? I mean, how do we build communities where people want to live in? I think there was a lot of local leaders that, without training, without resources, did some incredible things to help North Dakota keep up with the boom that we experienced.
In what letter grade?
Teacher,
you're grading the state government. What letter grade?
Well, I didn't answer about the state government, so maybe I have to say that for another time.
Thank you. Marvin?
Well, I guess I'd have to go with a C. It's really a mixed bag. Some of our standards as far as how the wells are cased and putting the wells basically along certain section lines to not have development scattered over the whole countryside, those were very good things. At the same time, clearly with the filter socks, the radioactive waste, those sorts of things, we just did not have those things properly handled. There's waste scattered all over western North Dakota. We don't know where. And so there's really a mixed bag in those things. And you know, we did handle this better than we did the last one. We still have thousands of acres of legacy destroyed land that hopefully will not happen with this development, but we need to start working on cleaning up that legacy destructed land. And you know, but it's a mixed bag. You know, it's a frustrating thing to people when they see companies that are not keeping their flares lit and things like that, and then when they call for help from the state, that they're just not getting help often in a timely manner. And that's so I you know, average, I guess I give them a C.
Thank you.
Our next question will be for Doug, and Mike will ask the question.
Well, following up on the oil boom question, a reader from Newtown wonders whether you're satisfied with the organization of the Industrial Commission. She suggests that its role is compromised between regulation and promotion. Do you have anything to say about that issue?
Well, the Industrial Commission, of course, is a vestige of an earlier day before we had an oil industry what's the size that we have. And so certainly there have been some stresses put on that governance structure and on the team that staffs and supports the Industrial Commission, just in terms of managing that size of a regulatory effort. And so certainly this is, again, a situation where, you know, during the boom we had a lot of hardworking state employees that were, you know, pressed, you know, to levels never seen before. Like anything, there's room for improvement. You know, there's rooms in terms of how we manage the governance, how we manage regulatory processes, how we take a look at separating out the promotion from the regulation, and how we look at staffing to make sure that we've got the you know, appropriate people in place to manage the regulations that we're trying to manage.
Marv, the question will go to you.
Well, I do have to question the current makeup of the commission. For instance, I just look at the crime wave we're having in this state, all the problem with drugs and everything, and we take our Attorney General, the chief law enforcement official, and we got him running the state mill, we've got him making decisions on student loans, we have him working on low-income housing. I'm a little questionable that that's really the best use of his expertise. And there's also the problem that we have 3 people who are elected running the Industrial Commission. And with the way it works with donations for campaigns, at the very least it gives a clear appearance of a conflict of interest. And that is part of what's created that rift between our government and the people of our state. And we need to somehow get rid of even the appearance of a conflict of interest.
Thank you. And Marty, now to you.
I would look for a way to create an executive position for especially the regulatory side, because that's where the point of influence comes in campaign donations. I'll rest with that.
Thank you.
Our next question is will be asked by Sarah, and it will be for Marvin.
This question is from a reader in Bismarck. If the legislature required you to do something with $100 million, excluding tax relief, what would you spend it on and why?
Well, really right now we need to spend that $100 million on Medicaid. Medicaid and Medicaid expansion, because it's not just going to bring $100 million to the state, it's going to bring other hundreds of millions of dollars. And right now, with what's happened, the majority party put our healthcare industry into recession along with agriculture and along with oil. And that's why our income is not meeting our projections. They did unwise cuts, and it's creating an economic problem in this state. So that's where I would put it.
Thank you, Marvin. Marty, question to you.
I would apply it to the budget deficit.
Okay, thank you, Marty. To you, Doug.
Well, the world is going through a tremendous transition right now, and the rate of change that we're seeing is only going to accelerate in the future. If we had this magical $100 million to spend, you couldn't spend it on tax relief and you couldn't spend it on other thing. I would spend it on trying to create awards and prizes that would trigger innovation for people across a number of fields. With the legacy fund that we have today, the size of that's actually bigger than what the Nobel family, when they founded the Nobel Prizes. It's bigger than the endowment that supports the MacArthur grants, MacArthur Genius Grants. And whether it's on Native relations, whether it's on reinventing education, whether it's on environment, whether it's on healthcare, it's been proven, whether it's the $25,000 that was in place that caused Lindbergh to fly across the ocean, which spawned a whole aviation industry, small prizes can lead to huge investments by the private sector. And I would figure out a way to turn North Dakota for a hotbed of innovation around some very cool incentive prizes to solve some of the biggest problems we face as a state and as a nation.
Thank you, Doug.
Mike will ask our next question, and it will be for Marty.
We're back in school. I would like you to give the state government a letter grade for the handling of the budget, both the forecasting and the spending.
Well, we're currently using Moody's to do the forecasting, and we have had some discussion about whether North Dakota as a state could develop its own forecasting team and become proficient enough to hire out to other states and become very good at it for North Dakota. As I said in my opening statements, I think that we all want to be optimists. We don't want to be downers. But facts are facts, and when you're going up and everything's hunky-dory, facts are easier to overlook. But when you're going down, and now we're into some serious questions about funding, then you want to be factual, and that, I think we have a shortcoming there.
And your letter grade is?
My letter grade on the forecasting would be low. A D.
A D.
I'll let them pass.
You're going to let him pass. Will you let him pass, Doug?
Well, I think as we ask about a look back, again, acknowledging it's always easier to be looking back than looking forward. I think there's three components of this that we can do better at. The first one is on the forecasting, which is the forecasting methodologies and systems that we use today are not satisfactory. We saw in August that we were still off by $9 million, versus a budget that, $9 million in August, we were off by a budget we set in July. So we're still not there yet in terms of fixing the forecasting, and there are things that we can do there. With using modern approaches to improve forecasting. The second thing is the actual budgeting itself, and I think, again, budgeting, we've got to go to zero-based budgeting to get us a better look at how do we drive budgets that are clean from top to bottom, because it's easy to put up the thing that's most dear as the thing that's cut first, and then everybody streams. The last thing is relative to risk management, because most companies that are in the commodities business do things to manage their risk, basic hedging strategies. Anybody that's in the oil or ag commodities business does this. The state has got a lot of mineral acres, and we don't do anything to protect the revenues during the good times. So we need to do better on all three of those. And then you're going to ask me the letter grade as a follow-up. I'm not going to give one because I think it's not useful to criticize a bunch of state employees that were working the best they could with the tools that they had. And I know that they know that they can do better. I know we can do better. The letter grade's not important here. It's what important is that we do a better job going forward.
So that's the second time you've declined a letter grade.
I think there's a lot of things about school that are outdated, and letter grades might be one of them.
Aha! Marv,
Yeah, that's true.
Please.
your turn, Marv.
Yeah, I really miss Representative Shirley Meyer, because they give us a forecast and then she'd whip out a Sharpie and give me a more accurate forecast in about 35 seconds, and she did it all the time. I think we should just hire Shirley and give her $500,000. But realize that for forecasting, there's no one in the world that can accurately forecast the budget for North Dakota, because we are commodities-based budget. And if we are commodities-based, if you could accurately forecast commodities, you sure wouldn't be providing a forecast to North Dakota. It's impossible to provide an accurate forecast. So I can't really give a grade there, but it's just anybody who claims they know what the commodities are going to do is wrong. And then as far as running the budget, we made the basic classic mistake. When the commodities went up and the income came, we cut the taxes at the top. Well, actually, we cut them on the way up, we cut the taxes on the top, and now we take the dip, and here we are. We don't have the money that we really should have at this point. And it's the standard reaction, but poor, I'd say a D as far as it goes for actually running the budget, because we made a clear mistake. Shouldn't do that.
D.
A D.
Our next question will be asked by Sarah and is for Doug.
This question is from a reader in Partial. The reader asks, what can be done about the schools in our state that are obviously failing with proficiency rates in the single digits?
Well, this is a challenge that we have across our nation as well as across our state, where we've got failing schools. And I think one of the things that we have to take a look at is alternatives, and whether that's charter schools, whether that's voucher systems, whether it's reinventing the education system from top to bottom. We have to look at it, but it's unfair to the students, it's unfair to the communities, and it's unfair to the taxpayers that we continue to fund systems that don't result. And I see a lot of people in education fighting over the dollar inputs that go in. I would like to have more people fighting, as you're saying, fighting about the results that come out the backside, because when we see the poor results on the backside, we just have to say, hey, this isn't working, and more money isn't the solution. We've proven that more money isn't the solution, so we have to come in with fresh ideas and fresh approaches.
Thank you. Marvin?
Well, most of the time, more money is the solution, because you can just go across the country, and where more money is spent, the schools do better. And that's just the frank truth of it. When you look at the poor performing schools in this state, when we went through and put the last formula in place, many of them were capped in such a way that they did not get their full funding under the formula. They saw things like their federal funds were taken from their state funds, and even when federal funds were sequestered, that money was not put back in their funding. So they were under financial stress. At the same time, we don't deduct for the federal funds for school districts like Grand Forks and Minot due to the way that they do the formula. So funding is very critical, and we should not be punishing those schools that are poor performing. We should be helping them, and it does take money.
Thank you. Marty?
I'm in favor of charter schools and vouchers and expanding the opportunities for students.
Thank you.
Our next question will be from Mike, and it will be from Marvin.
A reader in Mayville wants to know, how can we get more value out of the higher education system?
Yeah, I remember where I answered on that one. First, I was going to do the simple things like find a habitable planet and start a colony, and then I was going to fix higher ed. It's difficult. You take the recent incidents, racist incidents at UND, and the first tendency is let's form a committee to work with this. And it really seems that we have so many administrators and so many committees and so many meetings, and often what's happening is the students are not feeling valued, they're not getting time with people from the university and stuff. We really need to, we have the model right on some of our campuses with our football teams and stuff, where people supervise, show interest in the students, take care of them. We never say, oh, this guy from Chicago that came to play football, he flunked out after 2 semesters. I guess he's just not college material. We never say that. But we say that of a lot of other students in this state. So what we have to do is we really do have to make the student the priority of those systems.
Marty, I think you're next.
I went to UND, graduate of in a BA in journalism and English, and my department wasn't accredited, but I tell everybody I think I got a great education in journalism, and I've had a very satisfactory experience from that experience. Journalism taught me to do research. It taught me how to look things up and ask people questions and find things out. And I think the university system is great in North Dakota. The one thing that perhaps is unfortunate for us is that the locations of the schools and the number of schools are in our Constitution, so it's very difficult to be flexible.
Now, full disclosure requires me to say that I was actually in some of your classes, though I don't remember ever seeing you there.
Are you sure your memory was that
I might
good
not
back
have been
then?
there. and my memory might not be that great. Doug, it's your turn.
Well, when we talk about education in North Dakota, we tend to put it in two buckets. One's K through 12 and the other is higher ed. And there, as I've said several times, the world's undergoing tremendous change. Nothing is undergoing more change in the next 10 to 20 years than education. And why would you say that? Because we built physical institutions. We spent hundreds of millions of dollars, building buildings with the idea that information was scarce, that someone had to go to a location to learn from a teacher. And what we have now is we've got a paradigm shift where virtually all the information in the world's available for free. In some ways, the whole idea of structures of schools and universities will become an outdated paradigm because everything has shifted that they were built upon. And yet we haven't recognized that the paradigm shift has occurred. And so it's hard to fine-tune or improve a system that's fundamentally taking an outdated approach to the transfer of knowledge. And so, at least for me, I feel like that, if we want to have the best education system in the country going forward, it's not just K through 12 and people enrolled, it's for every citizen in the state. And we have to really rethink about how we reinvent our educational institutions to take advantage of all the world's information that's free. And that doesn't mean building more buildings.
Our next question will be asked by Sarah, and it'll be for Marty.
This is actually two questions combined into one, and the questions are from the students at Burke Central High School in Lake Knight. If elected governor, first, how do you plan to discourage underage drinking? And secondly, how do you plan on stopping the use of fentanyl by North Dakota teenagers?
Yeah, so many of those originate in the home, and I guess my first quest would be to keep families together. And if there is drug abuse or alcohol abuse in the home, I think it's important to develop maintenance programs where mom and dad can stay with the family, continue to work, and move toward a virtuous treatment of the situation and away from punitive.
Thank you. Doug's next, right? Doug?
Well, these are, again, big issues facing our state right now, and I think the fundamental shift that is happening in society and in North Dakota is that there's a glimmer of hope that people are starting to understand that addiction is a chronic disease that can be managed and supported. It's not a criminal activity. Addiction leads to a lot of criminal activity, but addiction itself needs to be treated as a chronic disease. And this is in everything from redesigning our judicial system to have drug courts. It's about rethinking about how we manage corrections. Where in our correction systems, people with addiction are overrepresented in our correction system. We have to address it. You talked about fentanyl. I mean, just in Fargo alone, we've had I think close to a dozen. We've had like 50 incidents, close to a dozen deaths in the last year that are with fentanyl-laced heroin. And again, part of the gateway drug to get there is alcohol. This is where it all begins. And so the only way we solve this is with a community-wide approach. It needs to be work. We need to be in the home, in the schools, in faith-based organizations. I mean, everybody's got to come together to try to solve this problem because this is not one organization itself that can solve this.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Marvin?
Well, I would agree with the idea that we need to really look at addiction in a different way than we have. The problem is that with the cuts in Medicaid that just occurred, there aren't addiction programs that are going to come, and there aren't addiction counselors that are going to come. The cuts that the Republicans made that an impossibility. So we're going to build prisons, and we're going to continue to put people in prisons, is the truth of the situation. For our students, it's education. And the problem comes with the way we're educating students in this state is that alcohol is a great rite of passage and is what we need in order to have fun. Somehow we have to change our society if we're going to change what our students do. And fentanyl, again, it's an educational thing. It seems like we just slide from one drug problem to the other, but we have to keep educating, we have to keep going. And hopefully at some point we can give enough mental health services that we can quit having so many people fall into addiction.
I have one follow-up thing to that too. We're experiencing the same thing that happened during the prohibition of alcohol. When everything went underground with alcohol, they made everything stronger so that the quantities were smaller and easier to smuggle. And that's exactly what's happening now in the drug industry.
Thank you.
Doug, would you like to add anything? No? Good. Our next question is for Doug, and it will be asked by Mike.
A lot of the questions that we got were about the state's political system, particularly about reporting of political contributions. Is there an issue here? Is there a problem here? And if so, what should be done about it?
Well, coming in as a political outsider, it's not something that I've studied. The people that are part of the system say there isn't, but on a general level, transparency is great. And I think there's an opportunity for us to have enhanced transparency across all of the state agencies. And again, I don't want to keep coming back to technology, but this is part of the transparency is getting not just a report from an agency, but actually getting the data. And when the data is available, then all the citizens can look at the raw data as opposed to just looking at reports that have been created. And there are a number of solutions that are available that are low cost and simplistic, from specific vendors. OpenGov.com, Open Books. Some of these are nonprofit organizations. Some of these are solutions. But again, we have an opportunity to really put the information out so that every citizen in the state of North Dakota can see how their dollars are being collected and where their dollars are being spent.
Marv?
I don't think transparency is the basic problem. There's no law you can come up requiring transparency that you can't hide the money in and you can't hide the money out. What we really need is we need to get to public financing of campaigns so that regulators are not funded by the very people that they are supposed to regulate. We will never have a government that people can trust as long as we continue to fund our campaigns through the very industries that we're supposed to regulate.
Marty, your turn.
Libertarians would not form a government in order to own a TV network and a radio network, but that is what we have in PBS and NPR. And we, the taxpayers, own those two networks, and I'm in favor of concentrating all of the campaign activities to those two networks in terms of public appearances on media.
Our next question will be asked by Sarah, and it will be for Marvin.
Marvin, are you satisfied with the state's practice of forgiving fines levied against companies that violate environmental laws and regulations?
There are times to forgive. It's not that every person needs to get a maximum penalty. But when the head of oil and gas division has to spend a half hour explaining to you why an identical violation is not an identical violation, I think we have a major problem. It does not seem to be acting as a deterrent to some companies. There are clearly companies who have a much poorer record than most companies are, and they're not being controlled. We just looked this last week where we have a company now has a lot of waste products that it shouldn't have had, and it's had excessive problems for a long time, and they did not act in a timely manner. And so, it just is one of those things that, yes, if it works, that's fine, but it has not worked.
Thank you. Doug? Marty, sorry.
I'm in
Sorry.
favor of employing insurance as much as possible. Insurers come in and they vet the process. They build the expertise, and they profit from the activity, which is a good thing. They hire local people, and they go in and they figure these things out because they're the ones that are at risk. The problem when you have politics at risk is oftentimes when all of a sudden a problem occurs, it's not easy to go out to the public and ask for votes and at the same time say, gee, we should have done this better. With insurance, you take that role away from the politicians and you turn it over to private industry. That's what I'm in favor of doing.
think, Doug, you're up.
Okay, yeah, I was
That's
just
okay.
trying to match Marty's answer to the question. Doug, go ahead, please.
Well, I think the question was on penalties, and I think that penalties, it's a form. It's been around for thousands of years. I mean, people try to use penalties to influence human behavior, just like we sometimes use incentives to influence human behavior. I think the question here is, are they working? And that's the thing. I'm coming in as an outsider. It's one of the things I'd want to look at and say, I've said numerous times in the campaign, everything ought to be on the table. We ought to be in a period of reinvention and innovation. And if these things aren't working, we should change them. If they are working, we should have them keep going. But I'd say, just as an outsider, I'd say, I've never seen a process that couldn't be improved, and I would guess the same lies in this one.
Okay, thank you.
The next question will be for Marty, and it'll be asked by Mike.
Is there a right to childcare? And if so, how should we go about providing it?
Well, there's not a right, but we would vastly improve. I know I have 85 young women working in 6 hair salons, and MJ Capelli is always pregnant. So we're well aware of this problem with child care. And I looked into it myself because my stylist encouraged me to do so. And it's just fraught with risk. There's a tremendous amount of regulations involved. There's a ratio of people on hand to the children on hand. And it's not long before the requirement on the part of the employee amounts to $1,000 or more a month. $1,500 is not uncommon. So you reach a point where you're putting out after-tax income into this situation, and you're really not making much on the other side of that. So it's a ticklish problem. I suspect that some of it comes down to the ratio of teachers to kids.
Doug, I think you're next.
Yes, well, if we go back, again, from a direct understanding, like Marty, when we were building Great Plains and creating thousands of jobs in North Dakota, we had some of the most progressive approaches, whether it was, paternity leave, maternity leave, child care support, all kinds of benefits, because we understand that if we want to retain workers in North Dakota and we want to hire young people, and we viewed it as a competitive advantage to be better than every other company in the kinds of services that we were providing. But when you get outside of the metro areas in our state and into the rural areas, there's a shortage of daycare providers, there's a shortage of acceptable daycare housing, there's the cost issue that was brought up. I think one of the most innovative ones I saw was in Watford City, again, where my running mate, Brent Sanford, they have 240 kids in the Wolf Pup daycare there, but it took a private-public partnership to get private providers working with public financing to get the right facility and the right people to take care of those. And without those 240 kids in daycare, then they don't have the teachers and the support personnel they need to help Watford grow.
Marvin?
Well, I wouldn't call it a right any more than I would call it a right to drive on pavement between Fargo and Bismarck. But by paving the roads, we lubricate business, we save wear on our vehicles, we probably disappoint the windshield doctor. But, it's one of those necessary things for business, for families, for women. We're really silly that we're not putting more of an emphasis on it, because we're missing thousands and thousands of potential workers in this state, both as jobs for childcare and as unfilled positions, because people are home taking care of their children. And we need quality, affordable daycare as part of what can make our economy grow.
Does the state pay?
I believe that we do, and we help with it.
Does the state pay?
I think private-public partnerships ought to be considered, but at this point, I'm not sure that the state should be directly involved in the daycare business as a provider.
Does the state pay?
No.
Well, we've asked you guys a lot of questions, so now we're going to give you an opportunity to ask one of your fellow candidates a question. And we're going to begin with Doug. You can ask either one of the candidates a question of your choosing.
Marty, you've been a successful entrepreneur and North Dakota business person for decades. Share with us some thoughts about the things that could be different in North Dakota that would help you be more successful, help you, create more jobs, hire more people, and keep growing.
When we started, my partner was still in college, and I was just out of college. And we started in a house. We didn't have any money. And one day, a guy came in, and he says, "Hey, how can you guys be open on Sunday?" And we said, "Well, because we're here, we want to sell something." And he says, "Well, don't you know that it's against the law to be open on Sundays?" And we looked at each other and shrugged and said, "No, we didn't know that," back when the blue laws were installed. But anyway, I would say the number one thing that I would encourage for the state to do is mostly just stay out of the way. Young people starting out, they're going to do things a little bit different. We certainly did. We tried to be open on a Sunday afternoon. My partner was from Minneapolis. It was regular way of doing business down there, so we didn't question it at all. So it's a question of low regulations, easy paperwork, fast reply. For example, we have a hard time, new stylists, when they get their grades, we have a hard time getting the grades back and the certificate to get them on the floor, get them working. That's still a problem for us.
Marvin, your turn to ask which candidate you want.
Doug, you were pretty hard on Attorney General Wayne Stenium during the primary on his support for Medicaid expansion. In this coming session, we either have to reauthorize Medicaid expansion or it goes away. Will you support the reauthorization of Medicaid expansion?
Well, one of the reasons why I was brought it up during the primary is the same reason that I would have questions about it today, because, well, there are many positive things that have happened in terms of providing support for people that need the care. At a fundamental federal level, at the national level, it's broken. Obamacare is broken, and it's broken not for ideological reasons. It's broken for financial reasons. I'm not an ideologist. It's just from a pure economic. Whether we look in South Dakota, Minnesota, we look at both the private and the public, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, people like United Healthcare. Everyone's pulling their plans of support out of Obamacare because you can't build a plan that's not actuarially sound. It was built on the idea that young people would sign up in droves for this program, and young people are not signing up in droves, and so there aren't enough healthy people in the program to pay for the people that have the need. And so what I've said is this is a thing where the federal government again has matched us with dollars, where they've lured us in. We'll pay 100%, then they say we'll pay 95%, we'll pay 90%. You've seen this happen before. Pretty soon it's down to 80%, 50%, and our whole state budget is spent doing federal matching programs. And if we think that the only purpose of a state is to implement federal programs that were designed in Washington, D.C. and don't work in a rural state like ours, then what do we need a state government for? We'll just have people here for the federal government implementing programs. But if we believe that each state ought to be a platform of innovation, then we ought to be able as North Dakotans figure out a healthcare program that works for everybody in North Dakota. It works well, and we can do it more cost effectively with better results than us just funding a federal program.
I wasn't sure. Was that a yes or a no?
Marty, your turn.
Could you restate the question, please, Marvin?
It's your turn to
Marty,
ask.
it's Marty's question.
Oh, my turn. Oh, I see.
to
I
ask,
thought you were
yeah.
Your turn to ask a question.
Okay, question for Marvin. Without spending more money or expanding the bureaucracy of government, what would your focus to lead North Dakota be?
Well, the big thing is we have to start having the politicians listen to the professionals within the agencies. We have many good professionals who've spent their life devoted to their profession. And as it stands today, they can't open up and speak their professional minds without being criticized and indeed often being driven out of their position. And so it's just torn people apart. We're losing good employees, and we find when we're doing audits and stuff that things that people knew about are not getting taken care of by the administration because everyone's afraid to bring it up.
Well, that concludes our question part. Now we will go to closing statements, and we will begin with Marvin.
Well, it's always interesting to speak in front of groups and to try and lay out a hope for the future of North Dakota. And throughout my campaign, I have said that this is a campaign of a North Dakota for all North Dakotans, because I find so many people across the state who feel left out, who feel not listened to, and who feel that their voice and opinion do not count. I would hope that I could lead North Dakota into becoming a friendlier place, into becoming a more accepting place. And if that happens, then we will start to have the people stay here, and we will start to fill the jobs, and we will start to grow. And so we need to change our state from the inside out, and I would hope to be the leader for that. Thank you.
Doug?
Well, first I want to start off by thanking the North Dakota Newspaper Association, and specifically Brock and Sarah and Mike and Steve and everyone for hosting tonight's debate. As we've discussed through the last hour, there are a lot of challenges facing North Dakota, and some of that starts with our budget situation where we're over $1 billion short of revenue. And this can't be fixed with belt tightening. It demands new ideas and new leadership. And the focus, if elected, is going to be on balancing the budget without raising taxes. The last thing we need to do when we're in an economic downturn is place more cost on the people of North Dakota that are generating jobs and generating economic activity. We have to create a diverse economy that builds from our core strengths in enemy and ag. We've got to have an education revolution that takes advantage of this abundance of free information. And we've got to create vibrant communities that will entice our young people to stay and families to grow here. And as we do all of that, we have to do it in a way where we maintain dialogue and inclusion for all North Dakotans. As I've said from the start, I'm not running to be a politician. I'm running to be an elected leader for everyone in North Dakota, and I would certainly appreciate having your support on November 8th.
Marty?
This is a good time for libertarian politics to come forward because, number one, we are an efficient form of politics. We don't look to government to solve our problems. We try to get everything done in the private sector as much as possible. We've found that that's far more efficient, and also without the political influence, answers tend to get made. One of the things that I'm absolutely convinced of as I've campaigned through this, everyone has agreed with me, is that if, regardless of whether we want government to do more or if we want government to do less, for sure we want government to be efficient. And the cornerstone of my campaign has been to introduce the tradition of private auditing by private firms throughout every agency and department. I've experienced that in my work with nonprofits, some of them large enough to have their own auditor, but in the nonprofit arena, you cannot audit your own books. Even if you have an auditor, you still have to hire a private firm, and there's good reasons for that.
Well, that concludes our debate tonight. I want to thank our candidates for taking time out of your busy schedules for being with us tonight. And on behalf of the 90 North Dakota newspapers that are members of the North Dakota Newspaper Association, I want to thank you, the audience, for coming in. And now you can applaud and cheer. Thank you.